Great. Well, I think it's probably time to get going. So Ian, thank you very much for joining us this morning. And just for everyone's knowledge, Ian runs Oak Bank, which is in Huntingdon, which he runs with Tim Furbank. And really, Oak Bank is all about creating the perfect environment or perfect habitat. And really, this conversation is going to keep coming back to the value of diversity, both at a holding and a landscape level. So there's going to be a lot to cover. So Ian, thank you for joining us this morning.
Oh, you're very welcome, and thanks to everyone for turning up and hearing my ramblings about what we get up to. So, well,
Ian, we've just had our preliminary chat, and there's just so much we've covered already in that, and I wish we'd recorded it and put that out in its own right. But there's a lot we're going to cover today, everyone. So start making notes is all I can say. So up until 9 o'clock, really, Ian, what we'd love to hear and understand is kind of, what has been your journey to date? It's always fascinating to understand people's journey, why they got, fascinated and passionate about the rural sector. So I'd love to hear a bit about your journey to date. Obviously, what you're up to at the moment at Oak Bank, which is incredibly varied in its kind of scope, and also your vision for the future. So yeah, really over to you. I'd love to hear your journey.
Okay. Well, I'm very much not from a farming family. My parents were retailers. I'm from Cambridge originally, and they had a china and glass shop in Cambridge, which sort of serviced the tourist trade, and so that's retailing was my background. And when I left school at 18, I actually started working for Sainsbury's as a training manager in their system there, and they've actually got a lot to answer for, because I was in the city centre store in Cambridge, if anyone knows that, and it's a bit like a cave. It's almost entirely underground, no natural light getting in at all. And having worked there for 6 months, it actually made me quite ill. I was inside under a fluorescent light all the time. And so I left that job, and almost out of necessity, I took a job that was outside, and I actually worked at what was then the Plant Breeding Institute at Trumpington. As an assistant in the barley trials work, where we were producing the seed that was going onto farm for sort of pre-basic and breeder seed. So it was entirely an accident caused by my necessity to be outside. Although as a youngster, I'd gone on bird watching holidays with, I'm not even sure this still exists, but it was called the Young Ornithologist Club in the day, which was part of the RSPB. And I used to go on trips, and we'd stay in youth hostels and go bird watching for 2 or 3 days. So didn't really realise back then what that might evolve into later on. During the time that I was at the Plant Breeding Institute was when Unilever actually bought it, and it became PBI Cambridge. And I was very fortunate that I played cricket with some of the directors in the company team, and a chap called Richard Fairburn sort of took me under his wing and said, you really ought to think about going to college. And he very kindly took me to the Royal Show that was still very much the primary show in the day, and sort of pointed out Harper Adams and Sealhane and Cirencester, which, to be honest, I'd never heard of any of them at the time. That was on a Tuesday, I think. And by the end of the following week, I had a place at Harper Adams, which was transformational, and the best 3 years of my life. It was just fantastic. So went there, did a agricultural marketing and business administration course, which was excellent. I did a period of time working for British Seed Houses during that course, and then came out and worked for a company called Samundo, who are now called Sonova, with Chris Green and Jeremy Taylor, who both of whom taught me a great deal. They were very different. Chris was a great marketer, and Jeremy was very steady. Made sure everything was right. And I think he's just recently retired actually. But I learned a lot from both of them. And it's funny how you go through your work every day, and you remember things that you learned from different people. So I was there about 5 years. Then I went to work for BDR, actually working on farm, buying grain, selling seed and fertilizer. Very quickly realised how much I hated buying grain. I really found it boring, but really sort of developed my interest and passion in the seed area. Spent a lot of my time, when I probably should have been buying grain, helping my other colleagues to sell seed, because that was my interest. So I didn't stay there very long. I went to work for CPB Twyford, who are now KWS. But then at those times we were developing the hybrid oilseed rape for pretty much the first time in the market. So there's varieties like Synergy, Pronto, Star, and yeah, that was a really good time. I went there to be in the sales and marketing team, and within a few weeks we had some issues, and I went to the MD at the time, chap called Ray Spreadbury, and he said to me, well, you know, write me a report on what you think we should be doing better, which I did. And he then turned around and said, well, right, go and sort it out then. And so I moved from the sales rather reluctantly into the production side. But it was very good for me to do it, because it was absolutely out of my comfort zone, but it was a really good opportunity. Working with people like Andrew Newby, Garth Bretherton, and you know, it was a really good time. Enjoyed it greatly. And then after about 5 or 6 years there, I actually applied to go to work for King's back in the day, but at those times I actually applied to do the industrial oilseeds side of their business. But when I was interviewed, they said, well, we think we found the person for that job, but we've got this other job that you're interested in the environment and, you know, birds and all that kind of thing, and would you be interested? And that's when I started working with Tim Furbank, and we actually started the King's business when it was then part of Allied Grain. We worked there for 3 years, and there's lots of things going on. This is before King's became part of Frontier, and we were quite unsettled at the time. There's lots of talk about the business being sold and so on, and we saw the opportunity with ELS coming along to actually be out on farm helping farmers translate this sort of stuff. And so we left there in 2004, set up Oak Bank at the end of 2004, started trading really in 2005. And our main focus back then was working with sporting estates, because they were the ones really who were doing the habitat work, because they had a vested interest in creating habitats for game birds. But you know, there's no doubt at all that, you know, you can't have game bird habitat without benefiting lots of other things as well. So what we started to do was using the entry-level stewardship at the time to try and change things like maize game covers into wild birdseed mixtures, putting in pollen and nectar mixes, flower mixes, all that sort of thing, to try and create a better mosaic of habitat on the ground. And yeah, that sort of it's just grown and grown and morphed into what Oak Bank has become today. So when we started, there were the two of us and a secretary, and now with our woodland team, I think we're up to about 15. And yeah, it's become really rewarding. We've got some fantastic people on the team with far better skills than I have in particular areas. You know, I remember talking to one of our clients, a chap called Sir Richard Sutton, whose estate is one of my favourites to go to because everything's done so well there. And I said, how do you make this work? He says, I just hire good people, and that's stuck with me. That, you know, that sort of it. I think in every line of work, in everything you do, it's all about the people. All the systems and, you know, the legislation and the rules and everything, they create the framework, but it's the people that turn that framework into activity and stuff on the ground. And it's so important that we recognise that and don't get away from, you know, the personality and the humanity that all of these things require to actually extract the best from them.
Yeah, and before we were talking about, you know, also very much the rural community, kind of like the rural community in its DNA really has kind of collaboration and synergy at its heart. Like I remember speaking to my granddad, and, you know, the stories that he used to tell about the camaraderie that used to exist in rural. And I think, you know, there's always been this inherent want to kind of in some ways work collaboratively. Maybe we've lost it slightly over the kind of the phase of BPS where everyone's slightly become more siloed, but I was wondering if you could share anything more about that in terms of the people, the dynamics, kind of your clients, how you've seen that evolve, and maybe kind of how you see it evolving now as well. We touched on with the work you're doing at Oak Bank, the work with the farming clusters, the facilitation funds, and the unexpected benefits that have come from bringing people together to think creatively about problem solving. So is there anything you can share about that?
Yes, certainly. I've certainly seen some changes which I feel are slightly unhelpful on some of the bigger estates, which we'll come back to and again about the clusters. And often big estates have been divided up into departments and cost centres, and everything's costed and so on and so forth. But actually what really made a big estate tick in the past was the seasonality and the community and people helping one another at different times. So like the shoot would need help at certain times, the shepherd would need help at certain times, the woodland guys would need help at certain times. But I find sometimes that the changes that have been made in the structure of estates have actually, they've made that more difficult because, for example, if the woodland team lend a chainsaw to the gamekeeper gets a bill, and things like that. It doesn't actually engender this community spirit very much. It can be quite difficult. But on the flip side of that, working with things like facilitated groups and farmer clusters, I'm absolutely convinced they're a really important vehicle for driving the changes that we need for a myriad of reasons, like just giving people confidence. And as I said to you earlier, I think one of the things that the farmer is most concerned about is what his neighbours think of what he's doing. I think that's really important. I know just in my house, it's important that my neighbours, my neighbours don't think I'm an idiot or think I'm causing them problems. So I think that's very important. And we've noticed, particularly in the last year, just the social and the support element that a cluster or a facilitated group can bring has been really valuable. And it often surprises us that geographically some of these folks are really close to one another, but they don't know each other very well at all. And sometimes it's for really silly reasons, like their great grandfathers fell out or something like that, and the families just haven't had a relationship over all that time. Or they might just nod at each other as they drive past each other in the car, but they've never really spoken. And suddenly they discover that they both like the same rugby team, or they both have an interest in bird watching, or they both, they just have common interests. And actually the social element of some of these groups has been really powerful. And when we haven't been able to travel and so on, those sort of things have been really positive. But in terms of the environmental side of things, if you see someone, who's near you, and you can keep an eye on it, you'll find that certain people have particular skill at delivering certain elements of a stewardship scheme, whereas other people have different skills, or they're just more confident. And actually, you can tell somebody something lots of times, but if they only need to see it, or you show them once, and they get it. And if they can see it on another farm in their neighborhood with the same soil type and the same weather and the same basic fundamentals, then all of the excuses that you normally get, oh, that won't work here, it kind of goes away. But then you build on that. So you build on the local networks. But then from my point of view, if we can create these habitats on one farm, that's fine. But if we can connect them up over a wider landscape, that's where the magic starts to happen. Because there are still remnants of really, really good natural habitats around the place. And the first, probably come to this later, but it's identify, protect, preserve, enhance, enlarge, and connect. I mean, they're all basic ecological principles: is know what you've got, look after it, make it better if you can, make it bigger if you can, and connect it to somewhere else. That's basically what we're trying to do. And that's the fundamentals of a good stewardship scheme on one farm, but it's the essence of a really great landscape scale scheme is something that is connected up over a much bigger area.
Yeah, and Ian, from your beginning, kind of the journey you've taken to date and meeting Tim Furbank and kind of the work that you were doing with these sporting estates to design well-configured habitats, I guess, obviously at a local level, but also at a large level. Is there anything more that you can share inside of You were saying within your team and growing it up to 15, the diversity of the team, you've got the woodland team, etc. They're all very competent at what they do. And obviously that's helping you engage and work with your farming clusters and your clients. In terms of the journey that we're all going on with the diminishing BPS and this kind of movement towards elms and the countryside stewardship that's coming in now as a bit of a buffer between the two, is there anything that you can share about really what you're seeing with your farming groups, with your clients, about how people are really getting prepared for the transition, but also where where you're placing Oakbank in terms of supporting that transition? Because I think there's a lot of complexity, there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of people naturally looking for solution, and it feels with your skill set internally with Oakbank, you've got a very powerful position to influence good quality design. And if it's going to be public money for public goods, the design of those landscapes is going to be critical. And is there anything more you can share about like how we can collectively work together towards designing better structured landscapes to deliver better benefits?
Yeah, definitely. The one thing I think is really important is that all of these schemes are environmental schemes. You know, they are supposed to be benefiting the environment. They're not designed to be farm income support schemes. And BPS was very much that, and there was a lot more, if you want to call it, profit in the BPS payment in terms of what you had to do to get it. Was significantly less effort than what you'll have to do to get the elms money or the countryside stewardship money. But they are there to benefit the environment. They're called environmental stewardship or environmental land management scheme. So we mustn't lose sight of that. There are quite a lot of schemes coming through where we're seeing very, very large areas of one option, like AB15, the 2-year legume fallow, or GS4, the Herbridge sward. Now, I'm not saying for one second that they are bad things to put in the environment, but they were never intended to be done at the scale that they are being put into some of the schemes at the moment. And I'm not blaming people for doing it, because the wildlife package allows it. And whether it should or not is a different matter, but it does allow it. And there's no question that economically it makes sense for some people to do that. But in terms of, is it the best thing for the environment, I feel that the best schemes require balance. They require a mixed range of habitats for a wide range of species. And I want to see farms being thriving, profitable businesses that are producing food alongside thriving areas of environmental benefit and wildlife. The rewilding movement is fascinating, and I think some of the projects that have been done are incredible places, but they're not models for British agriculture. They're just not. I mean, you've seen recently some, and they're all based around tourism largely, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. It's absolutely fine as a land use, it's fine, but it's not a model for agriculture. And agriculture requires production of vegetables and cereals and animals and so on and so forth. And some of those things are that they have bigger compromises environmentally than others. We've been talking to a number of people who grow root vegetables, and in terms of soil health and things, and what the customer requires in terms of the housewife in Tesco's is perfect straight vegetables. And all the chat about, oh, they'll buy knobbly ones. Well, the truth is, if you go into the shop, all the straight ones are gone and the knobbly ones are left on the shelf. That's not Tesco's fault. It's our decision when we get there that we don't want a wonky potato or a wonky carrot. So we are all in this together. No, I'm not blaming anybody. It's just that's where we are. And so in terms of what we can deliver environmentally, we have to also be aware of what the market is requiring from the farms, because for any of this to be sustainable or regenerative or whatever else you want to call it, the first thing that has to be sustainable is the business in profit, because you won't achieve anything if the business has gone bust. And that sometimes gets missed, because yes, it is an environmental scheme that I'm talking about with countryside stewardship, And for that scheme, the focus must be on environmental delivery, public money for public goods. It's not about supporting farm incomes. That's not what it's for. I'm not questioning the necessity for supporting farm incomes at times. That is absolutely necessary in the uplands for social structure, and there are lots of reasons why you should do that. But if you have a scheme that is engaged with delivering environmental goods and environmental benefits, that is what it should be about. And while doing that, the farmer should be rewarded well for doing a good job. And we'll probably talk about this in a bit, but I'm really keen that we find a metric for paying people who do a good job more than people who do a barely adequate job. And that's really important to drive delivery, because at the moment the scheme is designed to, if you get over the line, you get all of the money. And what that does is it drives trying to do the job as efficiently as possible rather than as well as you could do it. And I want to see a model where we do it as well as we can and we get rewarded for performance. And I'm hoping that those sorts of measurement tools will come down the line fairly soon.
Yeah, and that rewarded for performance is a really interesting one. And we were talking about within farming clusters, you naturally have people with different interests within those groups, and they become maybe the specialist in that area, whether it is specifics of ecology or water management or whatever it might be. And Ian, is there anything we can share about, so within this kind of fundamental importance, of course, these farms have to be in profit, of course they do, producing food that the supermarkets do buy and sell and consumers do actually purchase. There's the environment that has to be a part of the farm and the landscape, obviously for multiple reasons above and beyond farm income. We all need, healthy ecology, clean air, clean water, etc. In terms of actually this big transition and kind of getting this collaboration at a landscape level for farmers to deliver great stuff on the ground and really leverage the opportunities at their fingertips, is there anything you can share about how you're seeing that you can enable, support, educate the farmers within your groups to really maximize the opportunities they have for enhancing nature because of their specific geographies? And maybe even funding from water companies was something you mentioned earlier. Yeah. Is there anything you can share on that front? That'd be really interesting.
Yeah, the main difference between government funded, what's called a facilitated group, and some of the private funding that we're sourcing to deliver this is with a facilitated group, all of the advice has to be delivered to the group. We're not allowed to give it on a one-to-one basis. And we find that holds us back sometimes in that, particular individuals need specific help on specific things. So we tend to do it anyway, it's just not part of the facilitated funding. We're doing some work now with a water company or two water companies where we've designed a program of delivery of advice that includes one-to-one advice for half a day per farm to specifically go around the farm and identify things that they've got, because it is important that people recognize things, and sometimes they can be real fragments of an old habitat which are really, really valuable, but they can be very small and often people don't realize they've got them, or they don't realize perhaps that the farm next door's got something just the other side of the hedge and they could do something to benefit that. So it's actually going on the ground and doing those things. So the advantage of the private sector to us is that we can sort of co-design with them schemes that have their objectives at heart. So obviously with water companies, it's things like nitrates, phosphates, those sorts of things. And you can't achieve some good results with those without benefiting the wider environment. So I have no issue with that. But with a farmer cluster, we always make sure that it's very much the farmers at the heart who are driving the sorts of things they want to do. So as you alluded to, we've often found that within the group, we suddenly discover that there's a guy who's an absolute whiz on butterflies, or knows everything there is to know about barn owls or newts or something. And his enthusiasm or her enthusiasm it just sort of explodes, and the whole group saying, "Oh, I didn't know that," and they get enthusiastic, and then they start doing beneficial work all by themselves. It's not about money or funding. It's just about knowledge, enthusiasm, and again, some of these areas don't have to be very big. They just need to be. We always try and one of our first sort of main key species that we were working with initially was the Great Partridge, and if you find out either where you've got some or where you last saw them, there's often something about that area that they like. So you should try and focus your activity initially on those areas and then extend out, rather than, put something where it's convenient or, where it's a bad piece of ground for doing some cropping. There will always be options within stewardship that are universal and you can pretty much put them anywhere and they'll be beneficial. But if you're trying to do something for a specific species, you've got to put it where those things want to be. And that's really important. That's where the knowledge of the ecology sector, people like ourselves and FWAG and others, wildlife trusts and people, the knowledge of their local area is really beneficial. So we've got Kirsty Brannan on our team who joined us from RSPB a few years ago, and her knowledge of the Chilterns is absolutely spectacular. And she's so knowledgeable and so helpful to people in that area. And she's very lucky that they've got an incredibly interested group of farmers. They're doing lots and lots of good work. And then we've got Sarah Brockles, who lives over on the sort of Suffolk Essex border, and she's worked for Natural England for about 10 years. And she knows that patch incredibly well. So she's kind of got a radar. She knows what she should be looking for in a particular place. And it's that knowledge that we keep hearing, oh, farmers are the best people to do this. Well, they are the people who can deliver it, but they may not necessarily know what they've got. And we hear that every day. They want to know, they're interested, but they do need help. And the help is there. They have to go looking for it. And that's maybe what we could achieve with better funding. But to be honest, people have to be listening. They have to be ready to learn if they're going to take this information in, because the information's been there for years, and you just have to be tuned into it or be interested enough to go looking for it.
Yeah, and that's probably a perfect segue into the next question, which is, so obviously we've got our 90-acre farm just south of Guildford in Surrey, and obviously trying to appraise these different options and ideas. What advice would you give to us or the everyday farmer as to how to get prepared for this transition, how to kind of I guess position ourselves in the best possible way, or what kind of work do we need to get up to now so we can best take advantage of this kind of moving sort of transition that we're going through?
I'd certainly say the first thing you want to do is find out what you've got, in terms of features and underlying opportunities, if you like. So if you're in a water catchment, there'll be opportunities open to you that are not open to others. It might be that you've got, if you're in an area of outstanding natural beauty, there might be opportunities that are not open to others. In terms of the farm business, I would always say make sure that you're doing everything you can on your core farm business as well as possible, because there was a big drive to diversify a few years ago, and actually, if you diversify without making sure that your core business is functioning as optimally as you can, what you might do is you might make your core business worse because your eyes are not on the ball and you're not paying attention when you should be. So, there's a really good expression, which is first things first. Make sure that your fundamentals are right and sound before you go too far away from them. But, we're struggling as much as anybody with the plethora of opportunities that are being put into this space. There's an awful lot of noise about biodiversity net gain, carbon, all sorts of funding opportunities. But frankly, at the moment, as we speak today, countryside stewardship is really the only game in town with definite funding, that people know what's going to be available for a period of time. And then that's on farmland, and obviously within woodland there are some other opportunities there as well. But in terms of farmland, countryside stewardship is the only thing where you know what you've got to do, you know what the payment rates are, and you know it's there for 5 years. So that's why so many people are suddenly revisiting it. And I think they're right to, because in a time which is very uncertain, with BPS being reduced and removed, this does give you some things that you can rely on, with the promise from the government that if Elms delivers something which looks better to you, you can opt out. But from what I've seen of Elms so far, I see nothing that would make me want to change out of a good countryside stewardship scheme. I think we'll need to see the tier 2 details, and 5 years sounds like a long time away, but in terms of good scheme design and testing and so on, I don't think it will be ready much before 5 years' time anyway. So, and then in the first year there'll be difficulties in launching it, and applications will be potentially be very high. So if you've got something that you're happy with and is paying a reasonable return, then that should be your option. But I really hope that they will sort out this opportunity for blended finance with public money and private money. We can't get paid twice for doing the same thing. But for example, if countryside stewardship is paying you for the above ground work, so for example with GS4 you're being paid to put a legume and herb-rich sward, which is good for the soil and it produces a lot of advantages for invertebrates and pollinators and so on, but it's not definitely paying you or clearly paying you for the carbon that crop will be sequestering. So if someone else was facilitated to be able to pay the farmer for the carbon that crop would undoubtedly put back into the soil, that would make some of those options more appealing than perhaps they are at the moment. And that's the kind of blended finance I see working, rather than we definitely won't get into a situation where you get paid twice for the same thing. I think that would be a mistake, because all of these things have to be run past the public too, don't they?
Yeah, well, absolutely. And one of the things I was thinking as you were sharing that, Ian, is you were saying that one of the key components, obviously, get the core farming business working effectively, because that's got to be there, anyway. Yeah. But this understanding of understanding your underlying, what you have, and B, the underlying opportunities, because it feels like that's a fundamental, irrespective of countryside stewardship, Elms, whenever it comes, and also potentially funding from the private sector. And maybe we can go on to this, the next section, but in that process of doing that baselining and doing that appraisal, if we're doing that on the farm, what do we do next as a result of that? I mean, is it go out and get advisors? Or what would you say is the next step after that's been done?
It will depend a lot on what that sort of desk research shows you. And often the best people to talk to would be your neighbours, see what's working for them. And it might be that collaborating with your neighbours might be a really good way, particularly on such a small farm as that. It's very hard to tackle up and gear up for that sort of area. But on a bigger place, I think you should find out something with those opportunities. One of the key things for it to being successful is that you have a genuine interest in it. I think that interest will drive activity and learning, and that will really pay dividends. If it feels like you're doing it and it's a real chore, it's not very likely to work very well for you. So find something that you genuinely are interested in and you think fits very well with not just your situation, but also your mindset, your point of view, perhaps. Because if it's a real pain, it'll get done badly, because it'll be the last thing you think about, and the last thing that really gets your attention. So find something that works for you, and there's lots of, particularly recently, there's been all of these Zoom chats and things like that which haven't involved you leaving home, and I've been involved in groups from literally all over the world, and it's amazing what we can learn from an Australian farmer or a farmer in Iowa in the US, which is not necessarily the detail of what they're doing, but the principles behind what they're doing are really useful. And also, from our point of view as Oakbank, we're looking at things like carbon programs that are happening around the world to see how they might work here. So I've been over to the States a couple of times, and some of the work that they're doing on carbon is really interesting. one company in particular had a very good model, and it was a combination of modeling and testing. And I think that's the way it will probably go. But some of the testing, I think there's a lot of work to be done on there, but the technology of some of the sensors and things could revolutionize how that is done, and make it a lot more cost effective, because at the moment detailed testing of sort of deep core soil samples is quite labor intensive to get them, and then obviously there's a cost to doing all the analysis. But if we can work out some metrics of how routine testing, maybe every 5 years, of doing soil samples followed up with some monitors in the field or those sorts of things, that might well revolutionize how we monitor these changes. Because if we are going to take money from companies or public bodies, they have got to deliver real change, and there is an urgent need for some of this change to happen, whilst at the same time supporting farming businesses to produce food, because there's no getting away from it. We still need the food, but carbon and biodiversity and other factors that are affecting climate change are coming down the track really fast, and we need to be making positive activity on those things now.
Well, Ian, that's perfect. I mean, you may have already said it, but in terms of the UK becoming a case study for the rest of the world, we have this unique opportunity, this window as we transition into ELMS and the natural capital market forming. What would you say we need to do as a nation to really get this system working effectively and become a case study for the rest of the world? Maybe actually generate a model that can be replicated by other countries. What do you think we need to do to get that right?
I think particularly since sort of COVID has really undone a lot of the economic plans and economic sort of bases for how the government is operating. We need to demonstrate value for money to the Treasury, because it doesn't matter how hard Natural England and DEFRA campaign for money in these sectors. We need to demonstrate that very clearly. But also, I think the thing that we could demonstrate to the wider world would be how government action and corporate money can work together to deliver these changes at scale. That would be really, really good. There are some examples in other countries, and Australia is one where there is, the government is very much behind a carbon program there. I have some thoughts about that system, but that's not really for discussion today. But if we can link government policy, and the problem with private initiatives is all of the legal side of the contracts between the funder and the people delivering it. If you're doing private contracts, every single one needs its own legal contract between the funder and the provider. The nice thing about government-backed things is all of that element is all done for you. So it streamlines everything, makes that side much easier. So we need some scalable, meaningful opportunities that link private money to legitimate changes on the ground.
Perfect. And I mean, just to say, everyone, please, if you've got any questions for Ian, do chuck them into the Q&A. I've got one question that I'd like to ask on that point, Ian. I do think that it touches on a very important point, that idea of contracts between farmers and funders. One of the things that I'm hearing a lot more of is that farmers maybe only will be able to access private sector natural capital funding if they're part of a group, because funders want to put in a load of money and deliver bigger outcomes on the ground. In terms of those contracts, and I know this is complex, what form do you think those contracts need to take? Because I'm also really conscious, if there's a lot of administration in that contract process and the monitoring process, I'm fairly sure corporates aren't going to be interested in getting involved, because it'll just be too much hassle for the return, or they won't want their money going into administration, because that's not what their shareholders are paying for, right? Sure. They want. What do you see? I mean, how do you see that contract process working effectively for both the farmer, so they're not tied in knots, but also the funder, so they're not bound by loads of administration? How do you see that potentially working?
It is really tricky, and looking back at previous, relatively simple contracts like HLS, for example, HLS was a 10-year contract, and believe me, most of the time, when I was speaking to farmers, what they wanted to know was how they could get out of it if they wanted to. You know, they wanted to know when the break period was. So in that case, it was after 5 years. Now, these sorts of things, carbon sequestration is only really good if it's meaningful and long term. You know, that's really where we've got to get to. And with things like contracts that are, take the biodiversity net gain contract, that's generally, I think it's either 25 or 30 years. And talking to some people who've been involved with those, that's the first conversation that they want to have with people is, are you prepared to sign up to a contract which is 30 years long? And woodland's the same. I mean, woodland can be 100 years, depending on what you're growing. So a lot of farmers really struggle with that initially, because particularly at the moment where there is so much noise around opportunities and value and all this sort of thing, there's this worry that you're going to miss out on something better later. And I get it, I really do. I'm equally confused by the opportunities that are out there, but I think you just have to take the deals that are available when they become available at face value, and you go, right, well, is this a good opportunity for me and my family? So with a 30-year contract, you're looking at tying your next generation into something that they would not be able to get out of. So I mean, I'm not a legal chap, I'm not a land agent who does, you know, these sorts of contracts, but it is that long-term necessity, because the environment doesn't want something that's here today and gone tomorrow. You know, it can't keep having things. And I hear people asking for flexibility, and what they really mean is, well, if the wheat price goes up, I want to grow more wheat. And I completely get why they want to do that. But in terms of the environment, and you know, the butterflies and the bees, they need habitat all of the time, regardless of what the wheat price is. It might mean that if it's being paid for by public money, the money needs to go up to compensate them for the opportunity cost of doing that compared to doing something else. But it needs to be there, you know, every year, not just when the wheat price is low. So, you know, it's things like that. And as I say, I'm not blaming anybody. This is just the situation we're in. And, you know, farmers get blamed for all sorts of things, that they've been the agents for the changes, but the changes have happened because of government policy. And again, that isn't a Labour thing or a Conservative thing. It's, you know, the government of the day had priorities, and they, you know, I keep hearing about how the farmers ripped up all the hedges. Well, they did that because the government paid them to do it, because it was seen to be the right decision at the time. And you know, I don't blame them for following the money. That's what every business does, isn't it? You know, you follow the funds, and it has to be a good option for people to take part in these schemes, but consistently and long term, not flit in and out. And some of the frustrations of the old schemes were largely administrative. I mean, frankly, there was absolutely scandalous maladministration of previous schemes where people weren't getting paid on time. Yeah. It was absolutely unforgivable. But to be fair, they have resolved that largely. It's much better now. And you know, there was no excuse for it before. I mean, they blamed the EU and things, but there was no excuse. And it caused real hardship to people, and it caused a lot of people to disengage with the process. But to be fair, you know, they have done great things at getting that sorted out. So I'm hopeful that now we are, you know, paddling our own canoe outside the EU, that there will be no excuses. It is down to us to get this right, and you know, hopefully we'll be able to do that.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, we are very much masters of our own fate, and I think you know, it's very much a leadership role now. You know, it's not just going to fall into our laps, is it? We've got to go and create it as a sector. So perfect. Well, we've got a few people who've asked some questions, so let's transition to those now. So David has asked, interested to understand why Ian thinks the current use of AB15 is less than ideal.
Yeah, it wasn't so much that the use of it was less than ideal, it was just the scale that it's being done at was never really, I don't believe it was never really the intention of the Countryside Stewardship Scheme. I think they were wanting relatively smaller areas of these options to create a tapestry of habitats across the landscape. And I've seen some agreements now where people are putting, 300 hectares of AB15 into one agreement. And that's definitely not bad for the environment, not at all. But I don't think it was ever the idea that stewardship was trying to achieve those sorts of scales. And to be honest, I think that is really a farm economic decision rather than necessarily an environmental decision. So it goes back to the motivation for the scheme. And again, I'm not blaming people for doing it because the opportunity is there. The money is there. They're guaranteed the money if they take part in the Wildlife Office version of stewardship. And it makes good sense economically for some farms to go down that route. But I just don't believe it was ever the intention of stewardship, which, as I said earlier, really wants a nicely balanced agreement. It was never really the intention that such large areas of one option would be put in place. So there's nothing wrong with the option. The option's a good one, but it's really the scale that it's being used at now.
Yeah, and I guess going back to your previous points about really delivering proper benefits on the ground, it's the mosaic, it's the diversity. Yeah. That's what matters from a habitat point of view.
Yeah. It will do great things. Don't get me wrong. That mix will do great things for the soil and great things for pollinators. It's just really the scale that it's been doing, and the motivation is not about that. It's all about farm economics, and that's my concern, is that that's what's driving it rather than it should be done for environmental reasons.
Yeah, perfect. So Tom asks a really good question here as well. Have you experienced the private sector trying to find an opportunity to invest locally in biodiversity offset, but not managing to find anything well presented, managed and delivered? And is there room for more professional farm clusters that can package and market this? I think that's a great question.
Yeah. Morning, Tom. Yes, and I'm well aware that Tom knows this very, very well as well. Yeah, it's a new area of work, and the problem is the parameters and the framing of how you actually put one of these things together is very unclear. There's one area of the country, which is Warwickshire, which has been a pilot area for the biodiversity net gain. And the government, the deframetric for measuring biodiversity changes is being redeveloped at the moment. It's on 2.0, I believe, at the moment, and 3.0 is being developed. So in terms of that, in terms of how you measure it from A to B, we are involved in a couple of projects on that. And it is a little bit unclear how you really deliver that on the ground. So I'm sure in time there definitely will be a place for more organised groups, whether that's organised by the farmers themselves or by third parties who pull people together. It goes back to your earlier point, Tim, about contracts and who is dealing with those, because some of them will be very complex and some of them will be for millions of pounds. So they'll need proper legal advice and be really careful that the contract's drawn up well. But this thing about professional farm clusters is what entity or legal entity does your farm cluster take? So is it a limited, maybe you need to set up a limited company or an LLP or something like that to deliver them safely, and the farmers are almost like shareholders, that sort of thing. I'm not really qualified to say what would be best in a given situation, but all of those elements are there because if you're taking what will be very large amounts of money, there will be considerable obligations on everybody involved. And that's where a good contract will be essential.
Yeah, perfect. And I think Tom asked another question, which maybe tacks onto that, is when it comes to providing a combination of great nature, public access and food and education, I guess Tom's question, he said wonky carrots are okay, but what with that diversity of kind of benefits that are being delivered by that farm, is there any way you can see in that get packaged up and essentially incomes derived from those multiple public benefits? How do you see that working?
Yeah, I was talking to some farmers recently who were trying to set up a group of farmers of like-minded people who were farming in a more regenerative fashion, and they were trying to create a group of farms that were producing enough of something that a buyer would be interested in, because there are basically two ways you can go. If you're producing a limited range of products at a small scale, are you able to sell them locally? So it's having that connection. So the people in America that I've met who are making the most money from regenerative agriculture are directly linked to their end users. So they're producing, grass-fed broiler chickens, for example, and they sell those chickens to the people who eat them. They don't sell them to a third party who then sells them on. So there is an absolute connection between the person who perceives the value and the person who's providing the value. That's fine at a small scale, but it's very difficult to do, or more difficult to do, if you're trying to scale it up to a national available opportunity. However, there are markets for products which have particular credentials, whether they might be vegan or vegetarian or gluten-free oats. I mean, there's a business local to us here who do that, and there will be opportunities where you can brand products which have certain credentials that people are prepared to pay for, and that sort of thing is down to people to cooperate and collaborate with perhaps more independently minded millers and bakers and that sort of thing, to try and, if you are going to add value to something, you want to try and keep some of that in your business and not just give it away to somebody else to benefit from.
Perfect. And Ed asked a question again that kind of follows on from that to some extent, saying, could the professional cluster advisor take the lead on the administrative legal role and also regulatory function needed to fulfill public money for public goods or private outcomes, and leaving the landowner free to concentrate on the core farm business? Can you see this? We talked about delegation and abdication before. I guess, could the advisor, the facilitator, manage a lot of that administrative burden for the farmer, leaving the farmer able to actually go and run the core business?
I think the problem is finding an advisor that has all of the skills that you need is probably not going to happen. One person is what I mean. So I think you'll need to build teams around these clusters who are doing particularly the bigger biodiversity projects. So you'll need people who have legal skills, you need land agency skills, you'll need environmental delivery skills. And one person that's got all of those skills, I can't think of one. I can think of businesses that are trying to build those teams, but we certainly work collaboratively. So you try and find the best person to fit a team together for a particular job, because they're all different. But certainly having a good facilitator that has those connections and networks will be essential. And that's the kind of approach we're building at the moment, is everyone's talking and finding people who've got knowledge about certain sectors. So we're looking at a project which is connected with a new road being built locally. But we know we don't have all the skills within our team, but we know people who do have them. And we're more than happy to collaborate. That's just makes good sense for everybody to do that. But I think finding one person who can perform all those roles would be quite difficult. Yeah,
I think you mentioned it before within Oakbank, kind of the quality of the people that you have within your team, and I guess there's no reason for obviously farms and estates to configure their own teams of great people that can help them leverage what they have. So I think, really interesting, comes back to that point again, all about people and what people are passionate about and interested in. Last question probably, but if anyone has any last minute ones, please do throw them into the Q&A function. Paul asks, with SFI being launched, do you feel enough is being done at this level for those that only want to take this option up for the benefit of wildlife?
To be honest, I still don't have enough detail about what the SFI is really offering. We've seen that they're trying to pilot it, and to be completely honest, the people that they're appealing to with this currently are people who are not already in stewardship. So you've almost got to ask yourself, why are they not already in stewardship if they're interested enough to really take this forward? There are lots of reasons why people aren't, but generally I haven't seen enough in the SFI detail to say, you know, this is going to persuade me to get off the fence and get involved. There's just not enough detail there yet. As I understand it from people who are involved at a sort of higher level than I am, there is more detail that they're sort of debating at the moment, and it will be coming out soon. But I honestly, I mean, you know, I spoke to Paul the other day, but I can't give you detail because there isn't any in the public domain yet. So it looks significantly like the old ELS scheme at the moment. What I saw of it, which is what Michael Gove said it wouldn't be. You know, the ambition that he displayed for this whole process was really exciting, and but I've no doubt at all they've realised how difficult it will be to deliver that vision. But it's looking very, very much like things we've seen before, which, you know, people are very critical of stewardship and things, but actually it gave an opportunity to do it really well. I think the inspection regime was horrendous. It was really negative and negatively affected people doing a good job. I know plenty of people in the industry, and you know, the inspectors they used, some of them were on farms for 2 or 3 weeks, measuring every inch of everything. I could tell pretty much in a morning whether someone was trying to get their agreement right or not. You know, do they know where the file is on the wall? Do they know what's in it? Can they show me some examples of what they've been doing? I would know pretty well in half a day or a day on a big place whether they were really trying and doing a good job or not. And then move on. You know, give them some encouragement, give them some pointers, and move on to another one. And then you'll find people who are not complying, who are not doing the things that they're being paid for. I'd much rather we caught those people, and then by all means send a task force in to measure everything and work out how much money they owe back. But don't be an absolute pain in the arse to people who are trying very hard and doing a pretty good job. That's so negative. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, we've only got 1 minute left. I want to ask. Tom's asked another great question. Ian, are there any proof of concepts or any examples of local food networks that are happening at the moment that are kind of delivering great benefits?
I'm not involved with any, I'll be honest. Yeah. I know that there are some really good organisations in the States that are doing this, and they're using all kinds of farms, including urban farms and things like that, where they're pulling things together. For me, the most important thing is we need to be supplying nutritious, lower environmental impact food that everybody can have, not just the people who are able to afford it.
Yeah.
And that's the real challenge, and that can be through, you know, public buying. They could change the policies that they buy from people who are producing things with better environmental credentials, and that will drive change, because, you know, school meals and things like that, they're big buyers of this produce. So, and hospitals and all that kind of stuff, and the military, you know, there's lots of opportunities with public money that they could start to drive some of these changes. But in other parts of the world, yes, there definitely are, you know, not-for-profit organisations that are setting these things up, but I'm not aware of too many over here yet.
Brilliant, thank you, Ian. So conscious it's 9:30. Well, Ian, I mean, it's been a fascinating conversation to have. Honestly, it's been one I've been looking forward to, and I think, you know, so much of what we all need to really prioritize is good quality design of landscapes over the coming years. You know, that's really going to be what's going to set up a lot of these farming businesses effectively. So yeah, I just want to say thank you for taking the time this morning and sharing your thoughts, because I think it's an incredibly important conversation for everyone. So yeah, thank you very much.
No, thank you, and thank you everyone for turning up and having a listen. And you know, I'm very happy to continue the conversation with anybody that wants to have a chat about, you know, our website is oakbankgc.co.uk, and you'll find all of our contact details on there.
Perfect. And if anyone needs to find Ian through our website, do jump on Land Management 2.0 and you'll find Ian's contact details in there as well. So last thing to say just before we finish up is that we have just launched our online community. It's moved away from Slack. For those that were on the Slack community, we've got something much more effective to help people really engage, connect, and open up new conversations. So Mark has just sent the link in there. And also we have our upcoming events. So this afternoon we have our second webinar series with webinar episode with Anglian Water. This afternoon's on deal making for natural capital. So this is really going to get into the heart of how to do deal making for natural capital. And And we have next week, we're interviewing Lizzie Emmett from the Upper Wensum Farming Cluster, who again will be sharing about how they've set themselves up to be a corporate entity, and how the farmers are funding the facilitator to go and unlock natural capital opportunities. So do jump on the link that Mark has also sent on upcoming events. We really look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you so much again for your attendance and your involvement in these conversations. They make a massive difference. And yeah, we'll leave it at that. But thank you, everyone. Have a great day and look forward to seeing you on the next session. Thanks, everyone. See you. Bye.
Thanks, Steve.